Hello,
Um,
how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Oh, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Thanks so much for doing this.
No, thank you. Thanks for being incredibly prepared and organized. It's great.
Yeah, I think, ideally we'd be together at one place for this, but if we have to do it, then over Zoom and remotely, then this is not a bad way to go.
Yeah, that's right. That's the theme of the decade so far, eh?
I think so.
Yeah.
How have things been going for you?
Pretty good. Yeah, yeah. All things considered, pretty good. Yeah, I'm based in Halliburton, so I'm kind of insulated from the city, I guess. So
Right.
it's been not bad up here. But Forest, Ontario too. You know, everything with that's been Rob's done a great job keeping everything moving forward despite the pandemic.
Mhm.
Great staff, you know, pretty flexible with all that stuff. So it's been pretty good.
Yeah, the team's been fantastic to work with, so it's a great partnership. Are you
Mm-hmm.
still doing your PhD? That was in your bio, so.
I certainly am on paper and in spirit. You know, as to when the last time I picked up a pen and really did a whole lot on it is probably longer than I'd like to admit. But yeah, but no, it's still it's an ongoing thing. That's the dangerous thing with the PhD. There isn't really a hard deadline to finish it. So you know, I think I'm approaching year 10, which is
Oh my
not
God,
not great. Yeah, yeah.
that's all right. I have to tell you that I picked up quilting, before I was married, and I started quilt for my nephew, and it was about 20 years.
Yeah, I'm sure he really appreciated it.
Yeah, the little baby teddy bear motifs were.
A bit outdated. Yeah, I guess as they progressed, they probably got the theme changed, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's looking for something a little different, but it was about getting it finished. It felt so good to get.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Hey,
Hey
Rob,
Rob.
Oh, dude.
how
Hello,
are
Karen. Karen DeBow.
you? You
I'm
got
back
all
to see.
your Wi-Fi working?
I think so. Is it? Hopefully.
Yeah. Oh, good. We were just chatting about projects that seem to live on forever.
Yep. Yep. That's how it goes.
Oh
Hopefully that doesn't happen with the 2 billion tree program.
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yep.
So, Malcolm, how do you know Prashant?
We connected earlier this year. I'm trying to remember. It must have been in the spring, and it was yeah. We just had a great discussion, and you know, there was some overlapping themes that fit in with mostly with Forest Ontario, of course, and hence the ongoing discussions, and then also to an extent with some of the. So we're in kind of a similar region with one of his, I'm assuming, other interests, and so that I don't know, just kind of went from there. So I'm trying to remember where the initial introduction actually came from. I'm racking my brain.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so if you're in Halliburton, that's close to the Harcourt property then.
That's yeah, exactly. That's right. Oh yeah, I just quickly looked at my email. Yeah, there was a real estate broker that just connected us. Yeah, you know, I guess he'd been talking with Prashant and had talked with me and thought that we had somewhat common interests. So we just kind of cold called each other one day and had a chat. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's no, and it's a pretty small club of large landowners too up here. So you know, I guess
The club. Yeah.
yeah, you call it a club. Really, most of us don't even know each other, but you all kind of know who each other are, sort of. So yeah, yeah,
It's fascinating the networks and how they connect. That's why I always look, how did you meet? How did you get introduced? It's
hmm
quite organic, which is pretty cool.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
So,
Yeah.
Rob, did you finish Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard?
Sorry, did I finish what?
Reading the Finding the Mother Tree?
Oh, I'm still working on it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is. It's a very interesting read. Actually, it was interesting you mentioned that because Dirk Brinkman, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Brinkman Associates. one of the largest tree planting companies probably in the world. Anyway, I was talking to him, and he referenced the book as well. And I guess he actually knows the author, so he suggested I have a read of it. So, but it's fascinating. Yeah, all the interconnections between trees and mycorrhiza and all that stuff.
Yeah, and how she actually designed the experiments to show it, I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah.
We think of, projects that take, years, but I mean, she did it over several decades, which is just phenomenal.
Yeah, true dedication.
Very much so.
I haven't read it. The note in the agenda you shared, Karen, was a reminder to me to put it back on the list of things to read. I have not read it myself.
Oh yeah, it was, I have a stack, but, I had watched some of her YouTube and TED Talks. And so I made it a priority in our vacation this summer to read it. And I just was blown away by it. I devoured it in like a day and a half, and really inspired now, and looking at mushrooms in a whole different way, right?
The kingdom of fungi are not to be underestimated.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're actually adding that now to our forest management plan, taking an inventory of what we have and where it is. So we're starting with the fall, but we'll do it again in the spring.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool.
Were you, Karen, were you asking about edible mushrooms? Did we go around that discussion at one point? Yeah.
So we have a lot of different types of mushrooms, but of course we don't know how to identify them, and we're certainly not going to take risks unduly. But we did end up joining the Toronto Mycological Society, and we're hoping to actually host a forage walk this fall at Kingbridge. So that's where we'll work with people that know what they're doing to figure out which ones are edible and which ones are not.
Yeah, that's a good way to approach it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, no kidding.
Good morning, Prashant.
Morning, Karen. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you both, Malcolm and Rob.
Yep.
Hi,
Hi,
Prashant.
Nice to see you.
Excellent.
So we were just talking about some updates on things like the mushroom inventory and the reading that we've been doing and long-term projects. It's been awesome.
Excellent. Excellent.
So any questions at all about, the guideline? Again, it's just a guideline. It's not a word for word discussion document by any stretch of the imagination. And I know that, Malcolm, because you and Prashant already have had, ongoing dialogues in a lot of areas in common, you don't really need a discussion guide. I'm sure you'll have great things to talk about. But if you have any questions, let us know. Rob and I are going to kind of play co-host for the live stream. And if it's okay with you guys, we're going to record it as well. So that, in post edit, we can create some sound bites, and we'll share those with the Forest Ontario team.
Yeah.
That all sounds good.
I had one question after Malcolm and I were briefly chatting yesterday, Karen and Rob. In terms of the people on the live stream, and this is more to just gauge who may or may not be on it. Rob, Karen, are there people who may be what I would quote unquote define as religious environmentalists on this call, for whom the notion of just managed forestry itself is anathema? Like cutting down a tree for them is a problem versus them understanding the benefit of managed forestry and forest industry and all. So I just want to gauge, are there people like that we expect on the live stream or not really?
I don't expect that they will be online, but the other difference too is they aren't actually part of the Zoom call. We're live streaming this to YouTube, so there isn't a chat or a Q&A function.
Good.
So they might post on our YouTube account, but we can handle comments there.
I think along with that line, Prashant, if I could, Um, and you know, it's unfortunate we don't have a live a chat availability here. But what, quite frankly, I enjoy having the discussion with people that have concerns about cutting trees down.
Yes.
You know, I could go on as Bob knows about the sustainable forest management that I have here in Ontario and certainly in Canada. And I think I welcome opportunities to have those discussions and provide some factual information that quite often there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Yes.
That really sway people's opinions about cutting trees. So it probably won't happen today. But again, if you ever come upon a situation that maybe you're approached about something like that, again, I'm more than happy. I know Malcolm, he's a registered professional forester, so I'm not offering you up, Malcolm, but just
No, of course. Yeah, of course.
But we can certainly speak to it. And again, like I said, I welcome the opportunity to do that.
I find it's a lot less militant too in Southern Ontario. It's more, and who knows, probably a lot of reasons why, but I think you end up with that cabal of people when it's talking about the boreal forest that none of them have ever visited.
Yes.
But they like to see YouTube videos of it, whatever.
No, very well said. Very well said, Malcolm. And that's why, Karen, the intent, at least I have, and I think collectively we have, is to use this as a positive way to harness momentum energy, whether it is with the cities, the region, work Rob is doing, or still getting him air cover from even, Queen's Park or wherever, or Ottawa. So the last thing we want is someone who is rabid about it because he or she is misinformed, is what, Rob, we should be mindful of, so that we get ahead of it in case there is something coming out of this. Because, I like the write-up the two of you had sent over. We should touch upon forest industry, it driving economic prosperity. We should also be aware that it may create some criticism saying, look, these guys are talking about forestry related jobs, which amount to cutting trees.
So I'm going to ask us to go silent mode for the next few minutes, just as people start to join the live stream, and we'll start at 11:30. I think we can revisit that conversation as well after this event.
Okay.
Time to begin. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone, and happy National Forest Week. We are excited today to announce a strategic partnership between Forests Ontario and the Kingbridge Innovation Hub. Forests Ontario has played a leading role in advancing public awareness of the importance of trees and forests, while accelerating tree planting efforts and creating an inventory of certified tree seeds for the future. We are a not-for-profit organization working in close collaboration with the private sector, academia, and government agencies. We are the voice of our forests. My co-host for this event is Karen DeBow, Executive Director of the Kingbridge Innovation Hub, a new center located in King Township within the York region that is working to test, demonstrate, and scale up sustainable technologies. Karen, can you share a bit more about the Innovation Hub?
Hi, Rob. Thanks so much. Delighted to be here to mark this occasion, not only National Forest Weeks, but the official first day of fall, the equinox, a time for renewal of intentions. So the Kingbridge Center is located in a beautiful 113-acre property. 60% of the property is forested, and the Innovation Hub is harnessing the property as a living lab to test and experiment with promising technologies and methodologies that can be rapidly scaled so that ultimately we can achieve that objective of harmonious living with nature and to really figure out how to achieve that big objective of planting 2 billion trees. So to that end, we have a tree nursery populated with at-risk species, and we recently completed our first honey harvest on the farm, and we're working on a vertical farm on the property. So you can find out more at forestontario.ca and kingbridgecenter.com. So I invite people to come and check it out. And now let's introduce our guest speakers today. Malcolm Cockwell is the president of Forests Ontario, appointed by the board to the position in April of this year. Malcolm holds a Bachelor of Science in Forestry from the University of Toronto and is a PhD candidate at U of T's Faculty of Forestry. He's a registered professional forester and is the managing director of the Halliburton Forest, a multi-use private land stewardship company responsible for more than 100,000 acres in central Ontario. He oversees diverse land uses, including an integrated forest products division, as well as a tourism and recreation division. He also serves as chairman of the Acadia Timber Corporation. So clearly he's a leader in this sector and is a major force for positive change. Malcolm, welcome.
And I'd like to introduce Prashant Pathak, chair of the Kingbridge Center and Innovation Hub. Prashant is CEO of Agrata Inc., a private investment firm and diversified holding company with assets in food, agriculture, infrastructure, food security, specialty manufacturing and hardwood technologies, and digital commerce. He is a chair of the Innovation Economy Center, which brings together Canadian innovation hubs, institutions, entrepreneurs, corporate partners, and investors to create data-driven insights and policy options addressing key issues facing Canada's innovation community. He is an appointee to the board of the Business Development Bank of Canada and is an executive in residence with the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. We are delighted to have you both here to talk about the partnership and what you see for the future of forests in Canada. And Malcolm, can you share with us just your thoughts on how important Canada's forests are?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Karen, and thanks for having me here today and giving the distinction of kicking off our discussion. You know, the significance of Canada's forests is it's almost overwhelming, right? It's hard to capture it and to bring it into context. It's 350 million hectares, if I'm not mistaken, of forests across Canada, which is so immense it's almost a meaningless area. So I always find it useful to try to boil that down to something that the average person can relate to, which is to say that if you take that forest area and you take the portion of it that isn't under private ownership, so that's under Crown ownership, and you distribute that across the Canadian population, you end up with every Canadian owning, you know, I'm being a bit liberal in saying that, but in any case, owning 25 acres, sorry, which is the equivalent of about 20 football fields. So every single person in Canada today has about 20 football fields of forest that you know directly reports to them in a sense, and that's a more relatable figure. When you look at it in that context, and then you play that out, let's say on a sort of global scale, you start to very quickly conclude that Canada may, rank as more of a middle power when it comes to geopolitical items, military and all that stuff. But when it comes to things related to forests and the environment, there's no question at all that we're a superpower.
So it's amazing that we've got this fantastic asset. That as you said, the scale of it is just incredible. So it's clear that forests are important for Canada. Can you maybe expand a little bit on why they're important for a healthy environment overall?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't know if you were asking myself or Prashant.
Sorry.
I mean, yeah. Well, I'll take a hack at it. Without the forest, you're not going to have much of what makes Canada Canada, right? You're not going to have the water. You're not going to have the soil. You're not going to have the air, and you're certainly not going to have the wildlife habitat. The forest that exists today, whether natural or planted, and among those planted ones, whether planted with the intention of being replanted when they are eventually harvested or otherwise, collapse, or whether the intent with them is to facilitate, natural succession to a natural state. Those forests altogether are serving a function and acting as sort of biological machinery for both economic benefits, which I'm sure we'll discuss today, but also for all those environmental benefits that we very literally depend on.
Great, thanks. Maybe Prashant, you could talk about why forests are so important to our economy and what your view of what we need to do as Canadians is.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Karen. I couldn't help but make sure that because this is a live stream where I was going, is the resume that you guys picked up may need to be updated in the sense that a bunch of those positions I have since retired from, like the BDC or the APFC, but that's okay. I wanted to qualify that. But but to Malcolm's point, forests are extremely critical, and I like the phrase Malcolm used, which is, even though we may be seen as geopolitically a middle power, from a forestry perspective, we are out there amongst the top 7, top 10 countries globally. And that translates into many things. In fact, 3 big things, which are, if you put it top of the world order, right? The pyramid at the top of the world order problems, COP26, climate is a world order problem. And I think as Canadians, Canadian citizens interested in forestry, forest land conservation, forest industry, we have a significant role and a voice to play, both economically and geopolitically, what position or stance you take. The second thing, which is quite important, is the whole ecological systems that forestry supports. And Malcolm touched upon this, the notion of soil, the notion of clean water, clean air, and things of that nature. One simple example, since in the opening, Karen, you talked about what we're doing at Kingbridge, just the notion of wild bee and honeybee populations and how ecologically managed and ecologically curated forest environments, both wild, private, and managed, contribute to that kind of a diversity. And there is enough research out there that 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food depends on pollinator and pollinator activity and how those contribute to that. So there is a direct kind of economic impact which people visibly see on forests and forest products. Then there is an indirect economic industry that is existing, which is going way beyond immediate visibility of forestry into things like packaged goods industry. I joke because we are, as a family, invested in e-commerce. Every single e-commerce parcel that arrives at your doorstep, in a way, links back to forestry, because where does the packaging come from? Where does the cardboard and the container board and all that stuff come from? Is extremely kind of important for those reasons. So that's the kind of the second part of the pyramid. The third part, which is again quite important, is what we call the marginal social cost of these issues. The marginal social cost being clean air, clean water, carbon dioxide extraction, and in the future, where do these forests link into implications for industry seeking carbon taxes and things of that nature? And which is where folks like Rob and Malcolm through Forest Ontario are taking a lead, saying here is a role to play between the economic impact of carbon and the actual prosperity-oriented impact of carbon. So why don't I just stop there and let you and the others react to it?
Sure. Malcolm, did you want to weigh in on the economic aspects of forestry in Canada?
Yeah, sure. I think to those of us that are in the forest products business or the, the social side of the forest products world, we kind of take this stuff for granted, but a lot of people don't realize the number of folks that actually work in I don't even say in the industry, but in the space, because a lot of them are on the nonprofit side, including Forest Ontario. There's 200,000 people across Canada, roughly speaking. I'm probably actually out of date with that number. I wouldn't be surprised if it's more, in fact, than when that was last calculated. But 200,000 people across Canada that are doing everything from planting trees to measuring trees to cutting trees down to turning trees into useful products to turning those useful products into even more value-added useful products, and so on down the line. So that's 200,000 people, and a lot of those people are in communities that are very integrated with the forest itself. So you're talking the smaller communities in the north. That's certainly true in Ontario and across the rest of Canada. So that makes it a part of a sort of foundational part of the Canadian economy, without which you would see some very strange things happening with our demographics and population distribution. So that cannot be underestimated. The point that Prashant made about the supply chain, let's call it, of the forest products industry. These products find their way into so many advanced consumer goods that none of us even think of, whether it's we easily take for granted, whether it's railway ties on a rail system, to the shipping pallet that goods in e-commerce are being shipped on, to your point, to edible items that are in the grocery store, and so on and so forth. And all of that is often being value added and manufactured within our own country, which is not to be underestimated. So I guess I'd sum that up by saying that the integration of the forest products sector with the broader Canadian economy is so intense and so wide reaching that there's really no way to sort of pull it apart.
Karen, if I may add one more thing, which we tend to forget, because whenever we look at the forestry sector, there's a big focus on the big economic impact, because that's what governments care about. A key thing, which we need to keep in mind is there are multiple communities outside of the major urban centers. Those entire often a majority of their livelihood, economic activity, community activity, social activity often depends on the forestry sector. So to the extent, governments and organizations and companies are realizing to the fact that there are non-urban oriented communities, indigenous people up north in small towns, often the forestry sector is majority, if not all, of the economic, social, and community activity. So it's very important from that perspective, because for someone sitting in Toronto or New York, in the financial services sector, the impact of a $10-20 million forest operation may not be visible, but for that community, it's their lifeline and lifeblood.
Yeah, that's a great point, Prashant. And to add another dimension to it, it's not always the consumptive part of it, of the forest sector either in those communities. Where I'm sitting right now, and actually not too far away from where Rob is sitting, more than 6 feet away, that's for sure. But anyway, we're in the same kind of region. The forest is not only providing forest products, and in fact, we own our business owns a sawmill here where I'm sitting, and it owns a sawmill in the town that Rob is sitting in as well. And through those sawmills, we employ people, but also the forest is supporting employment on the tourism side too, and the experience side, which is often where the folks in urban areas are getting their connection to the forest. And sometimes it's painted as a conflict, right? That those who want to enjoy the forest for recreational purposes and for tourism purposes find it hard to kind of collate how you could do that with some sort of extractive or consumptive uses, such as sustainable still, but nonetheless consumptive, such as logging. And the counterpoint that I would certainly make, and I think generally within Forest Ontario, it's the same perspective, is that those are really overlapping and collaborative uses, and in many cases, the best path to keeping these forests accessible to the public and healthy and available to the public for enjoyment is through good management. Sometimes that management entails conservation and not doing pure conservation, let's say, and not doing any sort of extractive activities, but sometimes it entails a bit of extractive activities, and sometimes it's as simple, and this is very relevant to our discussion today, as simple as getting some trees in the ground, but making sure the right trees for the right reasons and establishing those forests for the future.
That's a great point, and I want to just maybe add one more question for you guys in this section, which is in the area of research and innovation. And I'm just going to share my screen for a second because in fact we have a very prominent Canadian, Suzanne Simard, who's done amazing work in actually understanding how trees and their broader ecosystems are connected. I don't know if everyone's read this book, but if you haven't, go and find this out. But just generally speaking, besides the tourism and besides the extractive, there's a lot of work going on in Canada around research and innovation in forests. Can you maybe just touch on that?
Yeah. I'll give you 2 or 3 very simple, mundane examples, Karen. Sweeteners. We are looking at an operation. In fact, Malcolm and I, when we got introduced, we chatted about it briefly because xylitol is a sugar-free sweetener, heavily dependent as an output from the forestry sector. If you believe that what I call lifestyle diseases are going to be a big challenge for humanity going forward because of diabetes and things of that nature, it's a classic food ingredient coming out of the forestry industry. And whether you call it research, whether you call it innovation, developments around certain ingredients. Same thing is happening on fiber. The notion of using pulp-based fiber for textile production is going to have much more favorable impact on us as humanity than using cotton-based fiber coming out of certain parts of the world. And so, that's where what we believe is innovation in, whether you call it timber and timber-related products, but then if you even go downstream to the point Malcolm was making, which is the usage forest-based products through pulp or cellulose are finding themselves in cosmetics, food ingredients, textiles, fabrics. I think that's where the opportunity is going to come from, because you're going to increase greater consumption of wood and wood-related products or forest-dependent products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to that effect, first of all, the R&D that's occurred in Canada over the decades to advance the use of wood is stunning. And not many people don't realize that FP Innovations, which is sort of the federal level research entity, that's the largest forest research institution in the world. Larger than any single one in the United States, and they've done some incredible work. In fact, actually, just yesterday, I was in Quebec yesterday in Trois-Rivières, and we visited InnoFiber, which is a provincially funded innovation center for forest products use, and somewhat tied into the pulp and paper sector. It was absolutely incredible what those folks are trying to figure out and trying to advance. It was really very impressive. Anyway, but back to the point. So yes, on all of those advanced uses, there's many more products. Every useful thing that we have squeezed as a civilization out of oil, we can do the same thing out of wood. It's a question of economics, and I'm sure over time, further R&D will resolve those economics. There's also a lot of simple things that we can do with wood, and hopefully do in the future. One that I would personally hope sees happen within my lifetime certainly is the broader development of use of wood for heat purposes in a modern systems. I'm not talking about the smoky wood stove leaking creosote that somebody might have in their back shed, but in more sophisticated, more efficient boiler systems that connect multiple buildings and entire communities, like you often see in Northern Europe. It's a proven technology that could be deployed here, and it's relevant to the discussion today because one of the key principles of sustainable forestry is you have to have strong markets for low quality wood. The stronger your markets for the lower quality wood, the more that you can invest in improving your forest, or if you want to look at it, quite pragmatically, in the biological machinery of the forest, because you've got markets for that low quality wood. And whether those markets are to do things like what you were mentioning, Prashant, on the pulp and paper side, or whether it's very simple on the heat side, the stronger those are, the healthier our forest will be in the long term.
That's a really interesting perspective to share, is that it's not one or the other, but actually hand in hand. By finding those markets to generate the, the investments needed to keep our forests healthy. That's really a nice perspective. Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next section.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Just following up with some of those comments, I think it really is just amazing to see how Canada has been settled, over multiple hundreds of years, and the use of our forests, but how we've adapted the use of those forests, and how we've, as Malcolm was saying, how we've integrated multiple use within the forest as we move forward, and realizing and seeing more and more values that we can actually achieve from those forests. And then as we look down the road, look into the future, I think it's being more and more recognized that how important maintaining a healthy environment is going to be to ensuring that we have a healthy society and healthy economy. So it's the environment that's driving that, and working towards people recognizing how important that is. And I guess back over to Prashant, you and Malcolm, just questioning what do you think the biggest obstacles are for Canadians to start realizing the opportunities that we can actually achieve from our forests?
You mean the challenges which face us as a country, or a business or enterprise or individuals in maximizing the value from a forest, Rob? Is that what?
Yeah, I think it's the question of getting people to start recognizing more how important our forests are, how important that healthy environment is, to be able to move forward to achieve what we'd ideally like to see from our forests and from our natural environment.
So if I go first, I would say, Rob, at the high level, what I observe in whether you call them business or social circles, I see there are 3 or 4 things. One is there is a general level of what I would call understanding or appreciation that the forests do play a role. And I think whether you call it the broader dissemination in the media, work that you guys have done with the schools of Ontario or schools across the country, there is an awareness, especially in the younger population coming up, that they play a critical role. At the very, I would say, directional level, they are good for the environment, they are good for species and all that. I think the second, what I would call the hurdle, or whether you call it adoption diffusion from an economic perspective, I find is the broader linkages between the economic impact of the sector and the social impact of the sector into the day-to-day lives of the average Canadian is one area where more can be done by all of us who are operating in the sector, and more can be done by the adjacent sector. It could be academia, it could be governments and things of that nature. And it goes back to the discussion we had earlier, which is awareness building and appreciation, more than awareness, appreciation around the fact that a significant portion of our economic activity is dependent on direct and indirect forest work. And that hurdle will get overcome by doing 2 or 3 things. One, I would say, is more continued public and private investments in the sector. So one statistic I have to look at is, compared to the Scandinavian countries, like, let's say the Finns, how much of dollars are going into our forestry sector, and how much of our harvestable, let's say, timber is being worked at. And you and Malcolm may know the more finer details, but what I see is our annual timber growth in Ontario is growing at a healthy clip of, let's say, 35, 40 million cubics a year. You essentially would say about 30 million of that is harvestable. How much is actually being utilized is 10 to $15 million cubes annually. So the question that comes to that, Rob, is building that awareness to say this is a resource, to Malcolm's point, like oil and gas, but a much more lower footprint resource that can be exploited in meeting our goals for, whether it is COP21 or COP26. So that's the second aspect, which is linking the dots on a much more day-to-day level. And then the third thing really is managing what I would call the challenges that we are facing broadly as a country or broadly as as a people across the globe, and ensuring that those challenges are addressed in a manner in which we see the forest activities as part of the solution. And where I'm going with this is, there'll be a big question saying, oh, look, climate change is causing forest fires. Ergo, a forestry operation may become a net emitter of carbon dioxide. And the actual answer is no, that's not the case. The case is, how do you go out and blunt or reduce or manage the impact of forest fires or insect contamination or insect deprivation of certain areas of forest land? So those hurdles is where I think the bigger chunk of our effort should be placed on, Rob. From our view as an investor, I'm sure Malcolm would have perspectives. He has got much more operating insights than we would have.
Yeah, well, I agree with just about everything you said there. I'll pick up on one point specifically, and that's that the perspective of the broader Canadian population on the function of the forest sector and what it's good for. And it's a funny thing about our culture, I guess I'll say, in that we're a bit averse to. I'll characterize it this way: like in Canada, you've got this on the one hand, this reluctance to be proud, and then on the other hand, this pride. And the reluctance to be proud is the well, our forests are kind of okay. We're not going to be too boastful about the fact that we've got these extremely well managed forests, that there's always room for improvement, but they're among the best managed in the world, and that we're able to balance all these different objectives, and whether they range from wildlife to recreation to carbon to wood supply to whatever. So there's a reluctance to be proud of that, but then there's this other side of it that's a pride issue where the average Canadian, they hear the expression hewers of wood and drawers of water. They get their back up and think, well, we're not that. We do all kinds of fancy manufacturing in this country, and that primary forest sector stuff that's the old days. And it's a bit of a contradiction, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to being fiercely proud of the fact that we do decent work in the bush, whether it's at either end of the spectrum. The industrial management that occurs happens within the parameters of very good, and strong guidelines, and the pure conservation that occurs is generally, I'd say, happening in the right places with the right people making decisions. So we're allowed to be proud of that, and then we don't need to be so proud about this aversion to being hewers of wood and drawers of water. Instead, we should embrace that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being hewers of wood if you live in a forested country. It's a very logical thing to be. So I would, back to the getting off my soapbox and back to the point, that is, I think, a cultural challenge that as a country we need to overcome, and it will probably become very, very relevant and very important for us to overcome through education in schools, through outreach, through live stream events like this, as our demographics continue to shift towards, first of all, an older population who are mostly urban, that are in many cases retiring to rural communities. They bring an urban perspective to these communities that may be different from what's traditionally been there. But then also as more and more people just moved into our cities, period. So that cultural challenge will be one that I think will rise to the challenge, but it is a challenge, and we need to acknowledge it as such.
Rob, jokingly, we are live stream, but I'll say that anyway. Jokingly, I'll tell you, I was in Quebec in the Pontiac region some months ago, and I said, the average Canadian needs to understand that from the morning tissue in your hand, which is very essential, to the tensile on your pillow at night when you go to bed, that appreciation of tissue to tensile dependent on forestry is still not pervasive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Absence of both will give you discomfort.
Yeah, and the absence of clean water and oxygen would be extremely uncomfortable. No doubt.
If I could just chime in there, one of the critiques that's been talked about in terms of reforestation efforts and managed forest is the monoculture and the replanting, but that's evolved over the number of years. There's much more understanding, awareness, and support for biodiversity and how important that is. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how the industry has evolved in that respect, Malcolm?
Sure. Yeah. I always, I probably get too technical and too in the weeds when I hear those things. So you'll have to indulge me for a moment, and then I'll actually answer the question. The notion of monocultures being bad is so amusing when, large portions of the forest, at least at the tree level, I'm not going to speak to the herbaceous level and below ground, but to the tree level, they are monocultures. Like, go up to the clay belt and Timmins, and good luck finding anything other than a black spruce growing in most of those areas, unless there's a little bit of elevation. You might have some poplar, or parts of Western Ontario with jack pine. So, monocultures can occur in nature. They're not an inherently unnatural thing. But I always find that kind of amusing. But I do understand the principle of it, and that we want to be managing for diversity. If you go back to really old silvicultural guidelines, for example, from the central Ontario hardwood region, you would have found that, and by old I mean pre-1970, right? No offense to anybody born before 1970, but those silvicultural guidelines are, you're not old, but they are. They would have been advocating for the very deliberate management for a relatively small group of species, right? Not necessarily monoculture, but they would have said, these are the commercial species and this is what we're going to manage for. If you look at the guidelines today, they would take the approach of, we need to manage for a diversity of species, always maintain or enhance diversity with every management interval in the forest, and in each event manage for what is best suited for that area. Right. So instead of trying to project where your markets might be 100 years from now, because you have no idea, and you also don't really know what the world's going to look like at that point, harness nature as opposed to fighting it to impose your will and establish something that wouldn't be natural. So a two-sided answer to a question, but
yeah. Well, I find it interesting. A lot of municipalities have defined targets to meet in their greenhouse gas emission reduction. And for many of them, planting trees is a major strategy. And in fact, they set targets for forest canopy. But even here in King Township, which is probably the most forested in York Region, I think we're still several percent off of the target. So how can municipalities, move this forward? I mean, there's kind of this tension between urbanization and development and then forests. I mean, what are the aspects of that challenge, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be different municipality by municipality. One obvious way, and I hope this isn't too much of a shameless plug, but there's support for landowners in and around those municipalities to get trees in the ground. And then, happily, there's resources that make sure that it's the right tree growing in the right spot for the right reason, and it'll have the right support. And that's really a function often filled by Forest Ontario and going forward to an extent hand in hand with Kingbridge Center. So that's a big step forward for any municipality, is to make sure that their taxpayers and their landowners know that there's support. Now, those are typically on larger properties, of course, as opposed to people's front yards. One thing that we've of course seen in Ontario, especially in Southern Ontario, is the impact of invasive pests on the urban forest, right? And also in the not urban forest too, I should say. Where if you're not careful with how you plant and how you monitor the trees in the urban forest, if an invasive pest comes along, you can be disproportionately exposed to the impact of that pest. The best example, I think, that's on everybody's mind is emerald ash borer, right? Marking the ash that was very heavily planted in a lot of urban areas, and it will take a long time for those urban forests to recover, because they probably went a little bit heavy with the representation of that species in those spots.
Yeah, I think Karen, one observation, at least, the practical takeaway I took away from the project in a way that the two of you who are leaders who did this, Robin, you are here. The Kingbridge experiment, when we said, how do you go into saying, okay, you're going to do a managed forest and then work with a York region or a township around tree planting. There are three things municipalities, I think, can do. One is leverage expertise because there is a body of expertise that is residing in the network that we as Kingbridge got to, let's say, with Malcolm and Rob and Rob's team and all. Then this whole notion of knowledge. like, we have had discussions with Forest Ontario around data, knowledge, which has been resident over decades, and using that knowledge at the municipal level to make much more informed decisions. Like Malcolm gave the example of going crazy, if I use the word, on ash and then realizing the consequences of that. So there is knowledge available in an organization like Forest Ontario. And the third thing I would say is execution, right? There is a lot of skill building that is required. We learned through our own experiment saying, can you responsibly, in a well-monitored, auditable manner, deploy 10,000 trees, which was the experiment where we worked with Rob's team and the rest on. That building that execution capabilities, skills, but in a much more, what I would call evidence-based manner, is something that needs to be done at a municipal level. And to the extent that like collaboration like ours can be essentially leveraged in those specific project levels. As Malcolm said, every municipal jurisdiction may have a different objective function, but you can use that expertise, knowledge, and execution insights to solve the problem for a specific jurisdiction. I think that's what needs to happen at that level in our view.
We've touched on climate change. Can you both share your thoughts about the impact of climate change on the species, the native species of trees here in Ontario, and what do we need to be aware of? What's happening to mitigate that?
Sure. Do you want me to take the first hack at it?
Sure, Malcolm, please. Yeah.
Okay, right on. Yeah, well, I mean, the climate is changing as we understand, and frankly, it's been changing. It's always been changing, but now we understand it to be changing at a more rapid rate than at any point in the past. It could end up having a very big impact on how certain species groups in different regions of say Ontario, but really across Canada, grow. In some cases, that may actually be positive, purely from a tree growth point of view. I'm not getting into the big picture environmental implications. Some things are probably going to grow better, right? But in other cases, it could be extremely disruptive. The mitigation effort that's best to take towards that is probably managing for diversity. So whenever possible, increasing the diversity of stands and trying not to hang your hat on one species, one seed group, one whatever, so that whatever ends up happening, we've sort of hedged our bets. With that said, ongoing research is key. So understanding how different seed zones grow in different regions, understanding how assisted migration could be a step forward is key as well. But with the climate change item as a major environmental concern, in preparing for that, there's the spin-off benefit of being more prepared for I would even argue, the more present environmental challenges in front of us. The biggest one being invasive pests, where climate change is going to roll out, and it's going to roll out on a short in the grand scheme, but still reasonably long time scale. Invasive pests over the course of a decade can do a lot of things. However, the happy news is that if we are preparing our forests for a changing climate, we're probably also preparing our forests for waves of invasive pests that may work through our forests over time. So it's either way, it's something worth being prepared for.
I would say, Karen, I would say to the species, I would say, my view as somebody who's coming outside in, observing the sector and seeing where the opportunities are, and Malcolm and Rob have been in the sector for a long time, is if we can find a way to address the impact of climate change, because we can't stop it, but the notion of what are the big the big issues causing the, whether you call it, they measure it as flux from the forest, right? How much of net CO2 is exiting versus being consumed. I think in addition to what Malcolm talked about on the genetic or the diversity side, solving for the insect issue and solving for the fire issue. The data which I have looked at, if you solve for those two issues in somewhat of an emphatic manner, we will get back to a level of our forests being net negative carbon sinks, which means they're actually absorbing more carbon than less. So that balance has been thrown off only, in my view, because of the insects and the fires issue, and addressing that in a much more emphatic manner through managed forestry or innovative ways to be, managing distancing or fires of that nature will probably get us further ahead in making sure you have a healthy acreage or hectares under cultivation or under management of forest, while still ensuring you can address the net impact of climate change. Insects and fires.
Insects and fires.
Agreed. Yeah. No, and the fire one's it's a particularly interesting case because it goes back to our discussion about the cultural challenge where, there's probably, I mean, I'm not a meteorologist, but there's a good case to be made that the recent really bad fire seasons are tied to weather, of course, right? Fire doesn't happen without certain weather conditions developing, but their intensity didn't have much to do with the weather. It has to do with the forest structure. Yeah. And if you want to suppress fires for 50 years and then not go in and cut those forests down, you're going to have a really big fire. Exactly. You can't kind of have it both ways. Those trees don't grow forever. Yeah. And so that's the kind, to your point, Prashant, that's the kind of cultural issue we have to overcome where we can say, okay, cool. If we're going to do management A, which is suppress fires and not let them burn, then we need to do management B too, in order to have A and B make for a good result. Otherwise, we're going to end up with disaster C. So those cultural challenges are what we need to overcome in a changing climate and a world with invasive pests and all these other challenges that are facing the forest.
Let me just touch base on an area that I'd love to get your input on. So, the federal government has put out this objective of planting 2 billion trees. And, that comes with a lot of challenges in terms of the stock. As we've been speaking between the two organizations, we've really understood that supply chain becomes an issue. Can you talk about, seed collections and the native species and some of the challenges for Canada?
Sure. I hope this isn't seen as passing the buck, but I think it would probably be wise to call on Rob on this one, given his far more extensive knowledge and experience than my own.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's I think the fact that there's been so much focus on getting more forests established, this is right around the world, and people again recognizing how important forests are to certainly to addressing climate change, and as well increasing those forests is going to really play into reducing the loss of biodiversity. So climate change is one thing, sequestering the carbon dioxide, certainly part of that. We can't, again, diminish all the values that our healthy forests bring us, aside from addressing the climate change. So all those things help and are benefited through enhancing and increasing the amount of forest we have in the landscape. I think the challenges with the 2 billion tree program are the complexity of it. And it is to actually increase the amount of tree planting to achieve the targets of 2 billion trees over the next 10 years is increasing the amount, adding to the amount of tree planting that we do right now, adding to that to about 200 million trees per year. And that was over a 10-year period. We're kind of into the second year now. So anyway, it's a significant increase in the overall infrastructure required. And that the complexity comes from, and the integration between everything involved with putting a tree in the ground, right from starting with the seed collection to getting the nurseries to grow, source identified seed, make sure it's a reasonable stock, certainly all native species, having the planting systems in place and the structures in place and the staff to have the capacity to plant that number of trees, to be able to reach out to landowners and engage with landowners long-term to get the trees planted, and then have monitoring systems in place to make sure that what you're doing is successful. And if it's not successful, and if it's because of maybe the incorrect species for the site due to climate change, then you can be very iterative and go back to your original seed collection sites and be, adapt to what is going to need to be done in order to move forward to ensure those healthy forests. It is becoming more and more challenging to get forests established. I mean, we've seen this year, for instance, severe drought conditions, and that's going to play an impact on the mortality of those trees. But we have to have the resources in place to adapt and understand why, what species are going to be more adaptable to drought conditions, and then be able to go back and get trees planted back into those sites. We can't give up on it. We just have to keep putting more and more resources to it. But it all starts with a seed. And I think earlier we were talking about urban. same thing. All those things are the same, whether you're talking about large scale tree planting or planting in urban centers. It starts with the seed, and it starts with the integration and the coordination of all those processes to make sure that everybody's talking to each other and understanding how the systems are working and what modifications need to be made, and all of that needs to happen in order to reach success with the 2 billion tree program and beyond. Because frankly, I think, you know, we're going to plant 2 billion trees, but we should have the systems to continue planting trees beyond just 2 billion in Canada. So
to Rob's point, and everything he said, I concur with. I think, Karen, we have to be careful in the sense that 2 billion sounds like a lot of trees, but in the grand scheme of things, not to rain on the parade, Rob is absolutely right. The number should be like 200 billion. Like, if you really want to make a dent, you need to get to that number. And this goes back to how we started, as Malcolm was trying to paint a picture of the whole forestry issue. It's a law of large numbers. People can't comprehend the nature of the problem. And I like how Malcolm broke it down to 25 acres in football fields. The $2 billion trees are not even a drop in the bucket with regards to impacting, if you really want to impact our carbon dioxide emissions as a country. You probably need to get to 10x that amount or 20x that amount to really make a difference. So as much as Rob's right about the fact that as a country, as communities, as organizations, we need to do a lot of work to get to 2 billion. The plan we should already be thinking about beyond the 2 billion. If you really want to hit your 2040, 2050 goals. And, you know, this goes back to the proverbial argument. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And if we're choosing today, the number as a country, as a region, as organizations should be 10x that number of 2 billion. I'll just throw that out as a challenge because, you know, we are on national, the Forest Week, and I'd rather have that factual and tough discussion now to say, let's not make the mistake as a country. If the number should have been 20 today, 10 years later, we're saying, oh, we should have planted 20 billion or begun planting 20 billion in 2021. We won't have the time for it.
So that's fascinating. So you're saying that we aren't being bold enough, we aren't being at scale of what we need to make an impact.
I don't think so. Malcolm and Rob can lean in because they are in the sector, but someone from outside the sector observing it, I believe you're not being bold enough. But Malcolm, Rob, you can correct me.
Well, I mean, I'll throw out there, you know, there's like whatever number of trees plus one is better than the original number. But there's nothing wrong with putting trees in the ground. But we do need to be, and I mean, we as you know, a country or whatever, conscious of the infrastructure being in place to pull it off properly.
Yes.
Because I mean, hey, we could all get together this afternoon and go plant 1,000 trees, but without making sure it's the right seed and it's the right trees for that site, and we've got the follow up and all that, there's a very good chance that those trees are just going to wilt and die, right? And that they're not going to work out. So that's not to say we shouldn't have the ambition. We absolutely should. But the investment in that infrastructure to support the biological machinery is necessary too. And I completely concur with what Rob said with respect to it starting with the seed. But it also goes with the parameters of where the trees are growing, right? And in many cases, it's going to be underutilized land, right? That is kind of not growing anything, frankly, other than maybe some sedges. In some cases, it's going to be marginal farmland. In other cases, there's a case to be made that some of these trees should be going in the ground, especially if it becomes the $20 billion tree program, going into remediating sites that have been affected. So, for example, underplanting in ash stands that have all died with emerald ash borer, or beech stands that have been affected by beech bark disease, or hopefully not, but it's looking like at some point in the future, hemlock stands that have been affected by hemlock woolly adelgid, that those stands can also be rehabilitated just as much as that marginal farmland going forward.
So it's a complex system with a massive scale that's hard to wrap our heads around. Sounds like it's a job for innovation.
Yeah, Karen, this goes to the point. Part of what has been intriguing about the work that Kingbridge and Forest Ontario are doing is really to the point I think Malcolm and Rob both made. There's an infrastructure problem that needs to be solved. There's an information and data problem that needs to be solved. And then there is this whole, call it genetic diversity problem that needs to be solved. And all of them have different supply chain components to it. Like where you're going to get the data, where you're going to process the data, how you're going to propagate the data to the right people who have it. That the data information has its own supply chain. The seed and the seed varieties and the seed collection and the seed dissemination has got its own supply chain. The land availability, as Malcolm said, identifying the land, making the land available, acquiring the land, or figuring it out what the right dynamics are, that has got its own supply chain. So each of those three layers requires innovative ways to solve problems on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I really like how you broke it into those three areas. And I think that just underscores Rob's point that this really is complex. So let's talk for a minute about the partnership. You know, what are you looking to, see come out of the partnership over the next couple of years? And what do you think is so interesting about it?
Yeah, I'll start off. So, I mean, Forest Ontario has always been a collaboration-oriented organization. It's certainly in the 8 years or so that I've been involved, and I think way before myself, before it was even Forest Ontario, its predecessor organizations, collaboration-oriented. So that means two things. One, that it's built up a large network of cooperative organizations across the province, and really actually increasingly across Canada, that allow it to execute its programs well. But it also means that it's got the means of quickly synthesizing with a partner organization and finding ways to work together efficiently. So this particular one's of interest because of this big challenge that's in front of us, of interest to Forest Ontario, that is, because of this big challenge that's in front of us, that's going to require a mix of expertise. And I think I'll keep it at a high level for now, and then I'm sure we'll dive into the details in the discussion. But the expertise that Kingbridge Center has with respect to data management, and then its interests with how to achieve these objectives in terms of getting the right trees in the ground with the right seed source and so on, is a great area of overlap for the future between our two organizations.
Yeah. No, Karen, I think Malcolm captured it well. And if you think about it, the original genesis of this innovation, I would say, in fact, if I take a step back, I would say, I think the kudos both to Kingbridge and Forest Ontario moving fairly rapidly from, no pun intended, the seed of an idea to where we are today, where we have two genuine experiments underway. So I would say that's a good part of it. The second thing I think, which I see the big promise, is really aggregating the skills around the data and information supply chain, integrating it with the forest supply chain is going to yield huge tangible benefits. So for example, the notion around, let's say, empowering people at the individual level to link them emotionally in an engaged manner to say, here is how you can plan your own carbon sequestration commitment. The work that, one innovative work that Kingbridge and Forest Ontario are looking at or working on is really creating this, what we are calling for the lack of a better word, I would say, an intelligent, informed carbon sequestration calculation approach, right? Which is, you take the genetics, you take climate data, you take location data and GIS data, you bring it all together, and then you provide for a model based on the genetics to say, here is how the impact of that canopy looks like. That itself, in the hands of an individual, in today's world, with whether you call it social media empowerment or individual engagement, can work wonders, because now you can start activating people at a unit level of 1 to say, this is my tree, or this is I'm following my tree. So that provides what I would call ground level engagement. But that data aggregated to a much higher level, that's where it starts driving economic impact, in the sense that, what are you looking at with regards to species and species management, or the notion of managing cubic meters of wood in certain unharvested areas. And the analogy I'll give you is, when the European Forestry Institute built this data exercise with the Russians, one of the things they found was, one area of Angara, actually, you didn't need to plant trees. You had to actually extract the dead wood and the low quality wood, I think what Malcolm said, out of the forest much faster, in order to be responsible from a carbon dioxide management perspective. So, so having that data and the data layer will allow us to make those kind of decisions in a much more emphatic manner, in a much more facile manner. And now you're making decisions around capital investment, capital deployment. Are you putting capabilities and jobs for the lower quality wood management? Are you putting it for mass timber or whatever? So that's where the role of data becomes very critical in partnerships like this.
Wonderful. Well, we're coming up to time, so I wanted to turn it over to my colleague Rob and get your thoughts on a wrap-up, takeaways from today. Oh, you're on mute.
It had to happen at least once.
That is the phrase of the year, right? You're still on mute. Absolutely. Anyway, this has been just a fantastic discussion, and I was very, very appreciative of the partnership. I think as both Malcolm and Prashant have said, the partnership is going to move forward in very significant ways, I feel. I think it's going to be up to the private sector and partnerships like this to really start moving the yardsticks on things. I think it's everybody in Canada can be involved with helping to address climate change, and certainly, everybody can help contribute to developing the things that need to make that happen. So again, I want to thank Prashant, yourself, Karen, for developing and being part and working towards this partnership. As you said, Prashant, is moving along quickly, which is absolutely fantastic. It's a great speed to be going. I won't go on anything further beyond that. But I do think it will evolve to something very positive. So thanks so much for that. And certainly, if anybody's interested in finding out anything more about Forest Ontario or Kingbridge Innovation Hub, I know Karen, you provided some website URLs right at the beginning of the discussion. So certainly look for those. And if there's any other questions from folks that are listening today, please feel free to send us an email.
Great. Well, thanks, Rob, and thanks, Malcolm, and thank you for Prashant for sharing your insights today. And we're looking forward to continuing the partnership together.
Lovely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining in. We'll see you again soon.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Oh, we're still here, Malcolm.
Where'd everybody go? I guess we're supposed to drop off.
Okay, I'll talk later.
Okay.